Presented by Stillafrog.
Surrounded by women mostly, a few couples, with the men glued to their phones as that somehow seemed to diminish their presence in what was otherwise all-female territory, I fidgeted in the faux leather waiting room chair, crossed my legs, then uncrossed, sat on my hands, played with my own phone, tossed it aside in favor of the latest issue of O magazine, anything not to think about the only thing I could think about. I even took to eavesdropping, or what I like to call ears open people watching. It was a waiting room after all. How could you help yourself? "It's going to be okay," he said, the man with the big, bushy Duck Dynasty-inspired beard. God, I hate that trend. His large, knuckly hand patting her comparably tiny knee. "You don't know that. What if it didn't work? What if it never works?" She was weepy, her eyes red, suggesting she'd apparently been weepy for some time now. "You gotta have faith, hon. I do. I know it's gonna happen." "Don't say that," I wanted to scream at him. "Don't tell her that, for Christ's sake. Not when you're dealing with something as fragile as what was probably a hopped-up-on-hormones 30-something woman who day and night could only see this big, giant clock grimly taunting her with its relentlessly moving hands." The woman then buried her head partially into his flanneled shoulder. More tears, I'm sure. More silent prayers. Not just for a child, but also for the strength to finally let go of that dream if it was not to be. A chipper, blue-scrubbed young nurse, for whom these emotional tragedies were no doubt daily events, then beckoned, "Abby?" And the woman and her husband got up and shuffled toward her as though someone had just shouted, "Dead man walking." My heart broke for her. And then there was me. Oh, the irony. A year and 2 months together and never a worry. The pill worked, right? As well as any vasectomy, my OBGYN had assured. Except when it doesn't. He'd left that part out. Do you know how many hours I spent Googling for those reassuring tales that false positives can happen? With each additional testimonial to this effect, I convinced myself further that the absence of a period when it had always come like clockwork, the slight waves of nausea and what I could only surmise was a lactating right breast, simply signaled the onset of menopause. Add to that the fact that I stumbled upon, if stumbling upon means using about 1,000,000 different search terms over the course of about as many hours to disprove what you most fear, the chances of pregnancy over 40 were slim to none, 2.6% to be exact. I knew it would be okay after all. But I had gone for the blood test anyway, only to have a stern-looking doctor shatter my world with the dreaded P word, pregnancy, preceded by the equally dreaded G word, geriatric, and followed by the revelation that sometimes the pill doesn't work, especially if mixed with certain medications. My first impulse was to seek out those bastards who'd spewed their venomous lies all over the internet about the near impossible odds of getting knocked up at my age, so I could scream about how wrong they truly were. In addition to saying some other things even less ladylike, I was panicked, bewildered, scared to death, and without a partner, so make that alone, too. Where was Daddy Dearest? Now that's an interesting question. We'd met online. I know, I'd heard all the horror stories, but I also heard the old guy with the glasses say that more marriages happen through eHarmony than any place else. I'd watched the tear-jerking commercials in which, lo and behold, Kate from Kentucky finds her soulmate, who unbelievably lived 5 streets over from her for 15 years. I'd gone to the wedding of a friend who'd met his bride-to-be on Match.com, a perfect pairing in every way possible. And so, like all too many women of a certain age, I'd heard the "don't try this at homes," but I'd listened to the "and they lived happily ever afters." That fairy tale ending was indeed where we were headed. I could just feel it. After a year, we moved in together. We went to Target and picked out towels for the bathroom. It may seem cheesy, but it was symbolic, even monumental in a way. We now defined ourselves as light gray 100% cotton from the Yorkshire Home Collection. Except that he had this ex-girlfriend. Yes, I realize that practically every love story that ends wretchedly begins with those ominous 4 words. He had this ex-girlfriend, and in our case, as with all the others, my stupid rose-colored, or should I say light gray Target towel-colored glasses blinded me. Becky. Big, buxom, blonde Becky. She'd taken their breakup more than 6 months before we met, incidentally. Pretty hard. And by hard, I mean overdose on baby aspirin for attention and then insist that he stand vigil by her bedside hard. Worse still, it didn't stop there. Not by a long shot. You'd think she'd give up out of sheer embarrassment when it came to light, despite her Oscar-worthy performance, that what she'd gulped down was, in fact, aspirin. Glorified Pez. Oh no, not Becky. I'd lived at his place for all of 5 weeks when he started getting texts in the wee small hours of the morning. I had yet to even break in my side of the bed. Begrudgingly, I'd conceded and taken the left. "You can't expect me to up and change everything, can you?" he groaned. What can I say? I was very doormatty in some ways. Anyway, he'd tried, the first few times, to dim the screen of his cell. Really? Sometimes he'd roll over and attempt to shield his phone with his body, but I still felt the slight reverberations in the memory foam mattress, one which apparently couldn't seem to forget Becky's ample imprint. After about a week, I could no longer pretend not to notice this nightly ritual. "You've got to tell her to stop," I demanded, the best hands-on-hip, woefully disappointed stance I could muster. "Stop what?" he replied. "Stop what?" I rolled my eyes. Of course, that'd be the first thing to come out of his mouth. "Please," I shot back. "Okay, look, she's not well," he said dolefully. "She wishes that suicide attempt would have worked." "Suicide attempt? Suicide attempt. She took an aspirin," I practically shrieked. "Can you try and have some compassion?" He sounded irritated. How could he be irritated? I was the one having to put up with Becky, with the incessant texts, his placating her, his weak-minded unwillingness to see what she was doing. This was starting to feel like far more than what I'd signed up for, when after a couple or possibly 3 bottles of Pinot and a fantastic roll in the hay, one of our best, come to think of it, he managed to slur out, "Want to move in with me?" Yes, indeed, the moment just screamed epic rom-com. Long story short, or a little shorter at any rate, Becky never did go away. And apparently NyQuil really does compromise the efficacy of the pill. Write that on the damn bottle, why don't you? You have every other side effect imaginable in font size .002 on that stupid label. Why not include may cause creation of a human? So, because of a few sniffles and a half shot of cold medicine, here I sit. And where is he? I was getting to that. I told him as soon as I got home after receiving the official results. His face. Let's just say the color of a vampire. An old, sick vampire who hasn't had any blood to drink in about a century and a half. "We need to talk. I've been putting it off, but I guess it's time," he then solemnly began. Son of a bitch, was all I could think. Turns out he and Becky had decided weeks ago that they were going to give it another shot, and he hadn't found the right moment to tell me. Apparently, this is also the reason for the ramped-up frequency of midnight texts. Translation? He wanted nothing to do with the baby, if I elected to keep it. And did I really think it was a good idea to keep it, he suggested, at my age? This, a question I struggled with myself for days. I was past 40, as he so kindly pointed out. On my own, the father opting to ride off into the sunset with unbalanced Becky. Could I do this? Did I want to? I'd never honestly pictured myself with a kid. The sleepless nights, the spitting up, the potty training, the riding on amusement park rides while trying to plaster on a, "No, I really am having a blast" smile, even as the nausea wells up. I never thought of myself as mother material. Did I get that warm, squishy thing that happens, that maternal melt when you spot a tiny, round little face cooing and gurgling with sheer happiness, waving their balled-up little fists and kicking their legs triumphantly? Of course, but it passes, and eventually, given the relationships you've had, especially in light of the relationships you've had, you realize that you were probably not meant to procreate, right? which is what I came to discuss with my doctor today. It's okay, hun. It's gonna be okay. The big, burly, bearded guy was now delicately escorting his quivering mess of a wife out of the examining room. This is all I've ever wanted. This is all I ever wanted, she kept saying in an almost little girl lost voice, not caring who heard or saw, as though if she repeated it enough times and clicked her heels together, she would somehow make it so. I cried inwardly, watching them. Slowly, the woman, Abby, somewhat hunched over now, appearing to cradle a stomach that there was apparently no need to cradle, made her way out the waiting room door. "Diana," the cheerful nurse from before called out, not quite as jubilant, most likely possessing more of a situational awareness at this point. I stood and gently touched the center of my belly. I looked down then, and in that instant, everything I'd thought, everything I'd decided about not being mother material, suddenly came undone. A Pandora's box of chaotic emotion unleashed. "Here we go," I whispered.